ever notice how the phrase, "now, what I'm about to say might not be politically correct," is basically the new form of, "I'm not a racist, but..." It seems to me that most of the people who strain under the supposed burden of political correctness, the people who piss and moan about how our discourse is too politically correct these days and you can't talk about anything, that most of the time the people making those complaints are people who tend to say really shitty things. They're not straining against some kind of oppressive speech code that is preventing people from expressing themselves freely. They're mostly people who would like to be able to say racist, sexist, religiously bigoted, or otherwise bigoted or offensive things without having to hear about it from other people. When someone says, "things are too politically correct these days," what they're actually saying is, "things are too not racist these days." I'd like to thank my friend Courtney, by the way, for giving me that phrase. I think that's the perfect way of describing it. In fact, even the terms politically correct and politically incorrect are used far more often by those who complain about the imposition of PC culture than by those who are supposedly doing the imposing. It's a far more commonly used form of what I still see in the atheist community from anti-feminists who complain about Atheism Plus, and they haven't gotten the memo that Atheism Plus is basically dead. That even the people who tried to get Atheism Plus started as a group don't use that term anymore and no longer identify as being a part of Atheism Plus. It's a ghost that is being kept alive by demagogues to give people something to piss and moan about and to give somebody something to complain about and something to tar their opponents with. Political correctness is the same way. PC, this PC crap. You can't talk about anything anymore. You just got to watch what you say. Everybody's so sensitive. See, and I can only speak for myself on this, but I don't think I'm the only one who feels this way. I don't view having to be mindful of the sensibilities of others as a burden on me. I don't view it as some intolerable restriction on my free expression. And whenever someone complains about political correctness running amok, or about how, things have just gotten too sensitive these days, things have just gotten too politically correct, I immediately become suspicious of that person. And I wonder, what is it that person wants to say? That they fear reprisal because of our supposedly overly politically correct culture. What is it that they really want to say? Complaints about political correctness from certain quarters have never really gone away, but the number of such complaints has risen significantly in the last week or so since the terrorist attacks in Paris, because there are a lot of people who want to blame those attacks on Islam, just Islam in general, not ISIS, not Islamism, but Islam in general and Muslims in general, and to punish Muslims, just Muslims, as a general group for those attacks and attacks like them. And they don't want to hear about what's wrong with that. They don't want to be labeled bigots. They don't want to be labeled intolerant because they say things like that and because they advocate things like turning away refugees or shutting down mosques and applying this kind of blatant double standard to Islam and to Muslims that they would never, ever dream of applying to Christians or Christianity in the aftermath of similar events that would have been tied to Christianity rather than to Islam. And they don't want to hear about what's wrong with it. They want to be told not that they're intolerant, but that they're brave, that they're truth tellers. When these people complain about political correctness and they say, "now what I'm about to say might sound politically incorrect," they're setting themselves up as a heroic truth teller. They're saying, "I know there might be those who don't want to hear this. I know there might be those who don't want me to say this, but I'm going to speak the truth, damn it, because the truth needs to be heard." They inflate their own importance. They exaggerate their own courage. They self-mythologize. They definitely self-flatter. And they also engage in really disingenuous gotcha tactics, like accusing people who point out that Islam itself is not to blame for these things. They try to accuse people of not caring about women's issues because of how women are treated in many Muslim-dominated countries, or how gays and lesbians and trans folk are treated in many predominantly Muslim societies. They say, oh yeah, you defend Islam, but if you defend Islam, then you're defending this kind of treatment of women and this kind of treatment of gays. And most of the people who are saying those things don't really care about the way women are treated in Islamic countries. They don't really care about the way gay folks or trans folks are treated in Islamic countries. The only time those concerns enter their mind is when they are using them to attack someone who has called them out for saying something bigoted or saying something offensive. I can't help but feel like most of the time when a Westerner complains about a woman wearing a hijab, for instance, they're not offended or outraged because they think that woman is being oppressed by her religious society. They're outraged and offended because that hijab is a symbol of the fact that that woman is an other. That woman is a member of an other group, an out group that they have been conditioned to mistrust and despise. And almost as despised as the actual members of that Muslim out group are those who are not Muslims but who insist on responding to events like the Paris attacks with a little bit of nuance and a little bit of thoughtfulness. People who say things like, most of the victims of ISIS worldwide are Muslims. And most of the people who are actually on the ground fighting against ISIS and fighting to take back territory that ISIS is occupying, most of those people are Muslims. Pointing out that, maybe it's not Muslims that are the problem. Maybe it's violent extremism. Maybe it's Islamism, the movement to politicize a particular interpretation of Islam and impose it on people, whether they are Muslims or not. Maybe things like that are the problem, not Islam. You say things like that, and many of the same folks who piss and moan about how restrictive political correctness is will call you an Islamophile, or will accuse you of being an apologist for Islam. And they're also the same people who pay the terrorists the compliment of treating their interpretation of Islam as though it were the objectively correct interpretation. Because they say things like, well, there are really no such thing as moderate Muslims, because the so-called moderates are the ones who don't follow the Quran very closely. So they've sort of installed themselves as the ultimate arbiters of what is and is not authentically Islamic, and what is and is not an authentic following of the teachings of the Quran. So they're all basically Islamic scholars, these folks. They've decided that there are no moderate Muslims. There are just Muslims who aren't very good Muslims. And then there are the terrorists, the violent radical killers. They're the ones who are the best Muslims. And yet they don't understand why people accuse them of being Islamophobic or being bigoted against Muslims. And look, I've said this before, I will almost certainly say it again in a context similar to this one, because it apparently needs to be said every time I speak up in defense of people who are being unfairly vilified for something, who also happen to be religious folks, especially Muslims. I'm an atheist. I reject Islam just as I reject Christianity, just as I reject Judaism, just as I reject Hinduism and Buddhism and Jainism and Sikhism and Scientology and Mormonism and every other religion I have ever heard of. I don't think any of them are true. I don't think there's any such thing as a true religion. I think all religions are false. I'm an atheist. But I know bigotry when I see it. And I know double standards when I see it. And I know that there are people in the atheist community, in the Christian community, in the overall non-Muslim community that I interact with on a daily basis. I know that there are many people who treat Muslims, who treat Islam, who think about Islam and talk about Islam in ways that they would never talk about Christianity or Christians, that they would never think about Christianity or Christians. They advocate that we treat Muslims in ways that they would never advocate that we treat Christians, that we would never want to treat Christianity. There is such a blatant double standard. There is such a blatant flattering of terrorists by treating their version of their religion as the most truthful, honest, authentic version that I just do not see about any other religious group. And that's my problem. The double standard, the assumption based on nothing other than prejudice that the most violent, radical members of the faith are the most authentic practitioners of the faith. That's what I have a problem with. Not legitimate criticism of Islam, because there are aspects of Islamic societies in the world today that I would love to see reformed. I would love to see Islamic societies treat women better, treat LGBT folk better, treat non-Muslims better. I would love that. I am all for those reforms. I think those reforms are necessary and long overdue and vital. But let me ask you something. If we alienate moderate Muslims by treating them like they don't exist or like they're not real Muslims, who exactly is going to accomplish these reforms? Because it's not going to be us. I had a question on a You Had to Ask video a few years ago from someone who said, I think they were very well-meaning and earnest, but completely misguided. They said, how about instead of dropping bombs on Muslim countries, we drop atheists to convince them that their religion is false and should be abandoned? Can you imagine anything more condescending and counterproductive? As though all we need to do is win all the arguments, and then we can fix everything. Reform will have to come from within. We non-Muslims can help speed those reforms along by identifying and helping the more moderate, humane members of the Muslim community, by lifting up those voices, by amplifying those voices, not by alienating them, not by making them our enemies, not by dismissing them, but by befriending them, by making them our allies and making ourselves their allies. That is how reform is going to happen. It's not going to happen by vilifying Muslims or Islam in general. It's not going to happen by vilifying people who speak up against unfairly maligned Muslims as Islamophiles or apologists. And it is not going to come by trying to pass off prejudice and bigotry and double standards as legitimate criticism. Those things are just not helping. They're counterproductive. And one final point, which I would hope was obvious enough that it didn't need to be said, except apparently it's not, and it does. When you sow division between non-Muslims and Muslims, when you paint Muslims as the other, when you vilify Muslims in response to events like the Paris terrorist attacks, you're doing exactly what ISIS wants you to do. You're standing up for ISIS. You're standing up for terrorists. So I hope it feels good. Hey folks, thanks for checking out the Ramble. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like and share this video. Subscribe to this channel if you're not subbed already. And also, please consider helping me to make more videos like this by becoming a supporter of this channel through Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/Steve Shives to become a patron. Thanks a lot. See you next time.